Hey everyone. So it's that time that we look at some maps again that I got in the postbox. This one is of San Juan and Puerto Rico. Two maps that Lainey sent to me with a beautiful card that Lainey sent to me. This one's really special. Look at this lovely paper. You can make an origami dove with it by folding it. I haven't done that yet because I wanted to keep it until I make the video. I'll try it in the next days and let's see how skilled I am at that. So Lainey says that these two maps are from the last vacation. One is of the island. Let's turn this over. The island of Puerto Rico. And then this one has the familiar design from the National Park Service. And it's of the San Juan National Historic Site. And you know how much I love these maps. I think they're always great in terms of the information that they provide. So I'll have a look through that. But I figured we could start off with an atlas and just figure out where Puerto Rico exactly is. Here in this lovely blue water. So we're taking a bit of an older atlas today. This one's from 1970. It might be a bit out of date. But it does have, wrong page. There we go. So there we go. It does have this map of, it says here, the Westindische Inseln, the West Indies. Which is a bit of an outdated term, I think. So we have the Antilles here. Right here we can see a little bit of Florida peeking in with Miami and Key West. Over here there's a bit of Mexico. Then we have Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. And then here the South American coastline with Colombia, Venezuela. Then you can kind of move up the Antilles here to Puerto Rico. So it's part of the Greater Antilles, together with Hispaniola, which is the name of the island. There are two states on it, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. if we look on, we have Jamaica here. And Cuba. Stretching out here almost across to Mexico. And then up towards Florida we have the Bahamas. So on one side there's the Atlantic Ocean, and on the southern side of Puerto Rico we have the Caribbean Sea. And then there's also the Gulf of Mexico up here. One thing that stands out here, you can see this right here, is that the water's really, really deep north of Puerto Rico. This is a trench where the deepest point, the Milwaukee Deep, is 27,000 feet deep or 8,400 meters. So that's almost like an Everest flipped upside down into the deep. It's quite amazing when you think of the Caribbean, which, you know, I always picture has just these beautiful waters, and then there's a trench like this just north. Alright, but let's look at the island itself. So Puerto Rico itself isn't the only island that's part of Puerto Rico, but it's the largest one. And that's also why you have the capital, San Juan, which is up there. And San Juan has about 300,000 people living there, if I remember that correctly. But if you also take the metro area, so outside the actual city, it's actually quite a populous area with a lot of people kind of concentrated here on this part of the map. But you can see that there are places kind of spread out along the coastlines. And then also you can drive through the center where you have this mountain range, the Cordillera Central, with the highest point being 4,400 feet or 1,340 meters. So you can get quite high, really. But I didn't check where on the map that is. Oh, it's actually right here. The Cerro de Punta. It's about 4,400 feet. And then you see here some small islands on the side. Puerto Rico was part of the Spanish Empire for a long time. And Spanish is still the main language on the island. And so the National Park Service issued the map in both English on one side and Spanish on the other. And I think they designed this quite well. You can easily see what language you want to read. Today, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, It has a bit of a special place because it's not a state itself, it's a territory. So it doesn't have the same sovereign state. It's also classified as an organized government or an organized territory, which means it does have a certain level of local government. Puerto Ricans do vote for their governor. They can't vote for the US president though, and they do have a representative in Congress, but this representative can't vote themselves either. And of course there's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of discussions about how to go forward, because I get it, it feels a bit unsatisfactory. Sort of a middle position. Let's look a little bit at the history of Puerto Rico. You can see here that it is at an important point on the route from Spain or the west coast of Africa to the Americas. And then from here you can see that you can return to Europe. So it says here, cycling in and over the Atlantic, ocean currents and the trade winds propelled the sailing ships to and from Europe. I do think it's a bit unfortunate that this map starts with Columbus in 1493, the second voyage when Columbus sights Puerto Rico. Because of course the history goes a lot further back. There's a little hint here, we see a Taino frog glyph. So that would be a symbol that you would find on a stone. But we don't really learn a lot about the Tainos. It just says, under Juan Ponce de Leon, Spain displaced native Taino Indians of Puerto Rico to control this strategic island. And then we have one more information here. In 1511 there was a revolt, but that's about it, unfortunately. So I think this map might be a bit outdated. It says here, it's very, very small, last updated 2010. And I do hope that it's getting a bit of an overhaul, because there's a lot of really important history here. The Taino probably came to Puerto Rico from the north coast of South America, from Venezuela, and they made their way up the island groups of the Lesser Antilles. One of the words that we still have from the Taino language, by the way, is canoe, because that's what they used to get around. And the culture developed on Puerto Rico about 1,000 years ago. Like by then it became dominant. Actual settlements on the island though are a lot older. I found some different numbers, but there are theories that the first people who reached Puerto Rico got there about 4,000 years ago. So there's a long history here. And the language of the Taino, even though it's extinct today, we do know a bit about it from old documents, and we know that it was related to languages spoken in almost all parts of South America. That's the Arawakan language group. You can think of it like the Romance family just with even more differences, even more diversity. And you can kind of find pockets everywhere here in most countries. There's a theory that it was an important trade language, so a kind of lingua franca. People from different places who wanted to swap goods would use one of these Arawakan languages to communicate with one another. And that's how the languages spread and how they diversified. And how they eventually made it to Puerto Rico. Columbus actually wrote down something about the people he encountered, and he spoke of them in kind of the highest words, really praised them, said that they were very noble, they had an incredibly beautiful musical language. But the story that's not being told here is that it was pretty rough for the Taino. Ponce de Leon became the first governor here. He started the Spanish colony, and he was involved in a massacre before that on Hispaniola. So he already had a reputation as being a brutal man. There's some back and forth when you look at what the crown dictated, how the Taino were supposed to be treated. But ultimately, they were forced to work for the Spanish crown. The Catholic Church turned up really quickly and established a bishop on the island. And, there are reasons for the revolts. It was quite brutal, sadly. And the Taino, of course, also didn't have immunity to European illnesses. And it is thought that the society basically collapsed and disappeared within 50 years of Columbus getting to the island. Initially, there were about 30 to 60,000 people living on Puerto Rico, so before the Spanish got there. The Taino population disappeared quite quickly, and the Spanish moved in. A lot of Portuguese soldiers moved in. They brought slaves from the African coast, which also isn't mentioned there. There were some revolts, for example, in the 19th century, which were quite important to the history of the country. But today, when you go to Puerto Rico and you look at the identity, at the culture there is still a Taino legacy. Some of it survived in the center, so around the mountains, where people were away from the influence of the crown. They had a bit more liberty to live their lives. And you can trace the DNA back to the Taino, mostly through a female lineage. In some parts of Puerto Rico, native DNA is up to 60%. More commonly, it would be somewhere between 10 and 20. So the legacy does live on, and it also lives on in our languages. I already mentioned there's canoe that we have from these original inhabitants, but also other words like barbecue or hammock. The word for potato and tobacco comes from the Taino language here from the Caribbean. And also the word for hurricane. Puerto Rico itself, of course, is a Spanish word, which means like Bridgeport. But a lot of the other names like Cuba or Bahamas or Bimini, these are also older words that were originally used by the inhabitants. Alright, but let's see what else we find here. So we have Columbus arriving in 1493. We have Ponce de Leon starting the Spanish colony in 1508. The rebellion. And in 1521 we have the foundation of San Juan, of the city. Interestingly, at the start, these two names were switched. So Columbus didn't call the island Puerto Rico, he called it San Juan Bautista, so after St. John the Baptist. And when they founded the city, they called the city Puerto Rico. So a good harbor for a city, for the ships to anchor. But for some reason, people use these names interchangeably, and over time they just got switched around, and now the city is called San Juan. We also then quickly have a fortification in 1533, and another one 1539. And the reason becomes evident at the end of the 16th century. That's the first English attack by Sir Francis Drake, followed by a second one. And there's a Dutch attack. Quickly then the city walls are started, so the entire place is being fortified. And it goes on. Another British attack. Eventually part of the city walls torn down to expand the city. And then in 1898 you get to the Spanish-American War, where eventually Puerto Rico becomes a US territory. And by 1983 it was designated a World Heritage Site. The reason for this massive and complex system of fortifications is because Puerto Rico was at a really important point in the Caribbean. So, like I said, this is where the ships would come in. This was like the first harbor. And Puerto Rico would allow Spain to control access to the New World. And as it says here, it was the key to the New World, the Western Hemisphere, and to the riches that it possessed. So we can see some of this fortification system down here. This is the San Juan Islet, which is connected to actual Puerto Rico by a bridge today. But you can see here there's a first line of defense, a second line, a third line, and then here you would have the city walls around Old San Juan, this part here being the one that's been torn down in the meantime. And the ship that would come in here from the north would try to approach the harbor and would get into the crossfire from the Castillo San Felipe del Morro and Fortin San Juan de la Cruz on this side. So these small points in the sea were also fortified. And here's a closer look at sort of the westernmost part of those fortifications. That's Old San Juan here. This part is where the wall would have been torn down. And you can kind of really nicely see the structure of the walls here. with some images of what they would look like and explanations as to what they are. So here, for example, the bastion. Where do we have one? You can see that here. And it says that they stuck out from walls so defenders could fire at enemies. Here we have an embrasure. What's the structure here? These are openings at top walls, which would let soldiers fire while being protected behind the structure. A ramp, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. They give you access to different levels. We have an observation post. This one is from World War II. Some loopholes and dry mode. A sentry box where soldiers stood guard. There's one here, for example, called the Devil's Sentry Box. And so you can walk around here from Castillo San Cristobal to Castillo San Felipe del Moro. And it says it's a half-hour walk. So that sounds really nice. You walk through Old San Juan, the walled city whose boldly colored houses and shops line its narrow streets, watched over by grill-worked balconies. Antiquity unfolds you. 500 years of history planned soon after Columbus's second voyage in 1493. The aerial photo orients you to these massive fortifications and outer defenses designed to disorient, unnerve and exhaust an enemy. From the cruise ship piers, it's a 10-minute walk to Castillo San Cristobal, and you can take the free white trolley at the designated stop. I think there would be here 25 right here in the middle. So some information on El Moro, which was built to protect San Juan's deep harbor from attacks by sea. It was the first good harbor for sailing ships en route to the New World after a 1 or 2 month Atlantic voyage from Europe. It evolved from a promontory with cannon to the massive 6-level fortress that confronts you today. So you can see here the different levels. It was worth Spain's investment. It protected Spain's access to New World wealth over most of 300 years. El Moro has endured as a masterpiece of military engineering from the 1500s to the present. And the Castillo San Cristobal over here is the biggest European fortification in the Americas. It lost some outworks and part of the city wall was torn down in 1897 to expand the city of San Juan. And you can kind of nicely see the influence of the church here too when you just look at some of the street names. There's Cristo, San Jose, Cruz, San Sebastian, San Francisco, and so on. There's also a street named after Ponce de Leon. And These two are simply called Sol and Luna, so sun and moon. And here I think you actually walk below the walls here, along this walkway, right by the sea, to the gate here. And that's what you see on the other side when you fold the map back up. Right here, thus an evening highlights the walkway beneath the fort wall sentry box. So that should be the way that you walk, with the lights on and the wall then is above you. You can see the palm trees here in the background. So that's where this is, the San Juan map. Then there's also some other parts that are highlighted on the other side. You have plenty of information for tourists here. It's almost a bit too much on such a small map. Gives you info on dining and lodging. There are casinos, dive areas. You can go fishing, golfing, hiking, horseback riding, etc. There are also ferries to some of the other islands. You can also take a tour and explore the Casa Bacadi, which comes from Puerto Rico, which I didn't know, I have to admit. And here again is the area that we just looked at, with some added information from the lady at the tourist office. Which, I don't know, it's a little touch that I just really like with these maps. That's what they're for after all, to give you some info for your vacation. And these are some of the smaller insets from the other side. And again, plenty of museums and parks and plazas that are highlighted here in this little area. So it took me a while to get around to looking at these maps, but I really enjoyed this and I learned a lot of history. I always find it a bit sad that in Austria, while we do get a lot of info on the Habsburgs, the parts on the Spanish colonies are kind of left out a bit. So it's like colonialism is bad, but it's only what other countries did. But of course, Austria and Spain were so closely connected through the two lines that I think it's, turning a bit of a blind eye. So, I Thank you so much for the map and the card. I still have plenty of other maps that I got from the postbox. We'll get around to them soon, I promise. For today, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this topic, and I'll see you again soon.